suicide isn't in the workplace, and rather that suicide prevention isn't in the workplace. Don't stick your head too far in the sand of, suicide prevention doesn't happen here, it doesn't matter, this is just about work. It's about people. And never forget that everything is about people, and it's about those relationships and those conversations. If you guys forget every part of it but one, remember the listen, because that is going to be 80% of the work.
What does it feel like when onboarding, payroll, compliance, and even IT access all run through one platform? It feels like everything finally works together and HR finally has room to scale. Deal brings global people operations into one place, so new hires start strong, workflows stay compliant, and teams move faster. See it in action at del.com/nickdayhr. Hello and welcome back to the HR L&D podcast. Now, the average person will spend a third of their life at work, and yet most HR teams still don't know how to recognize, let alone respond to, an employee in suicidal crisis. And here's the truth. Suicide is the leading cause of death for individuals under 35. EAP posters aren't enough. And by the time someone says, "I'm fine," they may already be in life-threatening distress. But what if every HR leader, every manager, every colleague had simple, actionable tools to recognize those risks a little bit earlier so they could respond more effectively and hopefully, as a result, actually save a life? Well, today's guest has done exactly that at the highest stakes imaginable. I can't wait to introduce her, but before I do, if you're new to this show, welcome. Please do remember to click subscribe or follow. Most importantly, though, if you can share this episode with your colleagues and friends, it may actually, after today's episode, genuinely save a life. So please do help me do that. Let's raise the profile of human resources worldwide. If you're not familiar with myself, my name is Nick Day. I'm the host of this show, the HR L&D podcast, but I'm also the CEO at JGA Recruitment Group. We're a specialist HR consultancy. So if you need talent, please do get in touch with my team. Now, of course, today's topic is sensitive, but it's also urgent and absolutely essential for every single HR and L&D leader listening to this show. It's going to help you to prepare your teams to recognize, respond to, and prevent suicide in the workplace, even without a psychology degree. And I'm joined today by someone truly extraordinary, Jessi Beyer. She's a mental health professional, former SWAT crisis negotiator, international speaker, author, and creator of something called the L.I.F.E model. We're going to find out all about that during the course of today's episode. Let's just say she has de-escalated hundreds of suicidal crises. So we're in really, really safe hands today. So Jessi, welcome to the HR L&D podcast. How are you feeling?
Oh my gosh, after that intro, how could I not be feeling amazing? Thank you so much for having me and for creating space to have a discussion about such an important topic.
No, I'm really excited. It's one of those weird things I said to you off air before we joined. I'm really excited by this conversation because it's so important, but I also feel slightly awkward about being excited about such a sensitive and urgent conversation at the same time. So we're going to dive into all the details in just a moment. Before we do, I'm going to ask you the first question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do the words human resources mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think for me, I'm coming from outside the HR industry, so perhaps my answer is going to be a bit non-traditional for your guests. But for me, human resources means the recognition of the value that humans bring to a workplace. I think a lot of folks in business think about money, they think about inventory, they think about logistics, and sometimes forget that their biggest asset is the people that make all those things happen. So to me, human resources is the recognition that human are the people. They are the core. They are the reason that business functions in the first place, and they're important to protect.
Wow, it sounds like you've done human resources your whole life with that response, Jessi. What a great place to start. Well, let's start with the straight into the deep end, because it's a sensitive topic, and I don't really want to sugarcoat it or go around the outside of it. There are hidden gaps in traditional suicide prevention. So let's start with the big question: why are the traditional approaches, the hotline posters, the mental health slips, sometimes the online training programs we're almost forced to do, why are they falling so far short?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to acknowledge that any workplace that does any sort of suicide prevention, even if that is a 988 hotline flyer or an EAP or an online training, they're a little bit ahead of the game. So I don't want to kind of throw those people under the bus right away. But to give an example of this that is slightly outside of the suicidal prevention type industry, we recently in our area, we had a lot of flooding. There are houses that are underwater. There are roads that got washed out. And an organization that I work with, they sent send an email to their employees saying, hey, the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, they have resources for you. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's check this out. What are some of these resources? And it was a flyer about the danger of having water in your home. And it was one of those moments where it's like, thank you for pointing out the obvious. Like, I know that water in my home is not ideal. And that is unfortunately what happens with a lot of these standard suicide prevention resources. Call the hotline. Yes, good. Call the hotline. But what happens before that? Many of these resources rely on the person in crisis reaching out for help themselves. We need those resources. They need to be there. But we also need to have a discussion about how the workplace and the peer group can recognize the signs of someone whose mental health is deteriorating and reach out proactively. This turns it from I'm in trouble, the onus is on me to reach out and figure out what resources are available for myself, into I work for an organization where it's not one of those, we're a family here type of things, but you're legitimately caring about each other, recognizing signs of deterioration in each other, and doing something about it. The other thing I'll add is that with employee assistance programs, there's often confidentiality concerns there. So the idea is that it is a resource that you can call, you can get a few free therapy sessions or connections to a long-term therapist. But because it is employer provided, a lot of folks don't end up using it because they're concerned about confidentiality.
Yeah.
The hotline, on the other hand, completely confidential, unrelated, recommended 100%. But again, it's one of those things that relies on the person to reach out. And often people don't think they can reach out until they are in imminent crisis. So all of this is to say, good, don't lose it, but we need to have a conversation about what happens before then to really protect people.
And it makes sense. It's critical. There's an old cliche, isn't there, that prevention is better than cure, right? Mm-hmm. But in this instance, you may not have an opportunity to cure. So prevention has to be right at the front of what we're trying to achieve here. Now, we know there are a lot of hidden gaps. I don't know if you've seen, I saw an advert recently for male suicide in particular, and there were two people sat at the football ground. I don't know if you've seen it. The individual who they're both watching football, and one slowly, he's always sad, he stops getting up out of his seat, and you're watching it, and eventually it's the other person that doesn't turn up. And the whole time you're led down the path of thinking it's the person who looks sad, who's not involved or whatever, that's going to be what happens. You know in advance the advert's about suicide, but where it captures you is right at the end. It's the individual who looks like he's been the most supportive all the way through, who doesn't come back, because often it's the hidden sides, it's the hidden gaps. And this is where it becomes so difficult for employers. So what can we do to really try and, I guess, unearth those hidden gaps to understand before we even get into that crisis ready kind of position?
Yeah, I want to differentiate between folks that die by suicide that truly gave no warning signs, and then folks that died by suicide that were part of an environment that chose not to see their warning signs. Sure. That is a really hard, I guess, thing to say. And I'm in no way trying to place blame on saying, oh, family member, colleague, like, you should have noticed, it's your fault that this person died. That is absolutely not true. But there's just pure and simply a lack of education about suicide risk factors and warning signs. And we need to have a conversation about it. I think one of the ones that is most relevant for corporate audiences and workplace teams that people don't talk about enough is the concept of leakage. And essentially what this is you and I are having a conversation, and I just kind of sneak in a little tiny bit of suicidal ideation to see how you respond. So we could be out having a beer after this conversation, and we're talking about how hard marriage is, right? And, spouses and hard and dishes and chores and all these different things. And I kind of throw in a comment of, yeah, I think my husband would be happier if I just went and jumped off a cliff. And you're like, haha, yeah, that's so funny. Marriage is really hard. But if you don't take a minute to follow up with me after that conversation and say, are you okay? Like, just wanted to check in. How are things at home? Then what my nervous system has learned is that I cannot trust you, which sounds dramatic, right? And I'm probably not having that conscious thought, but in my brain, in my nervous system, I threw something out there. You didn't care enough to acknowledge it. And so you are no longer a safe person for me. And so if we think about this in a workplace setting, there are a lot of professions. I work in law enforcement, not as a cop, but as a mental health professional. So trust me, I get dark humor. Like, I get that that's a thing for a lot of different organizations. But if you have someone who sends you, instead of just one dark humor meme, 5 in a row about quitting their job and running away to the mountains and never talking to a human again, might be worth a quick little message of like, hey bro, just checking in. How are things? You never know what you'll find. And so it's things like that people are like, oh yeah, well, we talk that way all the time. Okay, that's fine. I have no issues with dark humor. But have you had a conversation with that person? What happens when their dark humor changes into every other meme that they send you, or it's every meme that they send you? So what people really need to look for are those changes in behavior, not necessarily the one dark meme or the one missed, poker party or whatever it is that people do after work. It is the consistent changes, exactly like you were talking about in that video. At the same time, you have to recognize that even really, really good suicide prevention is not going to save every life. And that is another really hard truth. We
Yeah.
can do better. We can recognize, we can intervene, we can learn these skills that we're going to talk about today. But understanding that you could have someone who was incredibly hopeful about the future, never expressed burdensomeness, which are two other key signs to look for, never had any leakage, never had any warning signs at all, and unfortunately dies by suicide. So take the pressure off of yourself and give yourself the opportunity to learn the risk factors, learn the warning signs, and have the courage to ask if you see some of them show up.
Yeah, I mean, the advice is absolutely fantastic and critical. I think you mentioned something that's important just to take a note of, which is you work in mental health, and often this is a mental health situation. So if you're not struggling with your mental health, it can be difficult for co-workers to understand how someone might be feeling. Well, from our perspective, we can't understand it because everything seems to be going so rosy. But when you're in that position, you're not looking at the world in quite the same way, and often you can feel very isolated and very lonely. So that outreach can be really, really important. I've read some of your work, obviously, prior to today's show. I know that you've said that co-workers often play the most important role in suicide prevention because we see people daily, not occasionally. We spend so much time at work, which is why it's such a critical environment for spotting some of those early warning signs. I want to just ask a little bit about your background. What's led you to become so passionate, so well versed? You've obviously created your life model as well. Just to give the listeners a bit of an understanding of just how much expertise and experience you've had in what is such a sensitive space.
I appreciate that. My story, unfortunately, started with my high school boyfriend's suicide attempt. And I think for many of us that work in mental health, we have some sort of personal story that connects us to the work that we do. And so that night, I was the one that ended up calling for emergency services to prevent him from completing that suicide attempt. Very awful night, very, very awful night. He's still alive. He's doing great. So it was a successful night, but very, very difficult. And when law enforcement showed up, they brought a social worker with them. And I just remember I'm sitting on this chair in his house, curled up into this little ball, crying my eyes out because I'm this 16-year-old that's trying to navigate life and death, essentially by myself. And she walks over and she gives me her card and she's like, hey, if you need anything, I'm here. You can always call me. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And I was like, wow, that is so sweet. And then I promptly put that card in my bathroom drawer and forgot about it. But it planted this seed in my brain of there are people out there that can be there for other people in their worst moments. And so as I went through school, I got my undergrad in psych. I got my EMT license. I did some work as a first responder, doing search and rescue type work as an EMT as well as a search and rescue volunteer. I went to grad school. So in grad school, I studied trauma and crisis intervention in my first degree, and then military psychology and terrorism in my second degree. I was really just drawn back into this crisis space. And when I graduated, this position, this opportunity to do what I'm currently doing, which is working as a mental health professional embedded with law enforcement, responding to these crises in the field, it just kind of fell in my lap. And I was like, circled all the way back to that 16-year-old self in the business card in the bathroom drawer and was like, this sounds amazing. I want to do it. I would be an atrocious private practice therapist. Like, it would not go well. I am built for being there in those crisis moments. That is just where my skill set is. And so, yeah, I get to respond to 911 calls that have some sort of behavioral health element. I get a lot of suicidal ideation. I get a lot of psychosis. I get a lot of substance use challenges. I get some sexual assault response. And not only de-escalate that immediate crisis, but then also connect that person to longer term care to hopefully reduce their reliance on the emergency system and prevent future crises. And then in addition to that, I'm still a negotiator on our SWAT team. And so I get to run around with those guys and provide mental health expertise in those situations and negotiation strategy advice and intelligence gathering and all sorts of stuff like that to help make those negotiations as successful as possible.
Wow. What a story. And you know what? And I have not experience to you, but I think a lot of people have had some experience with suicide in one way or another. They know someone that's gone through it. When I was at university, my friend's mum committed suicide. I was there when she was told. And that experience in itself was I'll never forget how she received that information. One of my wife's clients sadly committed suicide quite recently. So that was a gentleman, again, within the age brackets that we've been discussing here, really quite at high risk. And actually not in a suicide situation. I don't talk about it too much on this show, but I've had a daughter that had a food eating disorder that went through the self-harming thing. And as a parent, you're petrified that that might be what ends up happening. But ultimately what it does do is it focuses the mind, and there's a lot of goodness that can come out of this understanding. For you, Chris, a whole career of saving other lives and being in this crisis prevention. Even in my daughter's story now, she's really passionate about helping others with food eating disorders, and yet she's only 16 years old, but she's come through it and recovered. Now she wants to help others. And I think that when you're involved in that, I think this is why it's so important. It's not something we just see in the movies. This is all around us, and it's way more common, like food eating disorders, if you like, than we ever really think they are until you're in the middle of it. Now, you've de-escalated crisis situations in some of the highest pressure environments imaginable. I mean, as a SWAT negotiator, that must be, really, really high pressure. And as a result of that, you have, of course, come across 6, I think you call it tactical communication strategies that anyone can use to de-escalate a high-stakes situation. I wonder if you can just bring us up to speed with some of those. Maybe, hopefully, someone listening, it can help them as well. But I think it's really important to bring them to the fore.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I find kind of frustrating about my profession in mental health is we like to kind of gatekeep some of these skills behind the degree and the license. And that's not accurate. And it ends up hurting people because we don't have these skills in the hands of everyone who is on the front lines. Exactly like we were talking about earlier. The first person that's going to notice, or even the first person that someone in crisis is going to go to, they're likely not going to go straight to their therapist. They're going to try to talk to their coworker. They're going to try to talk to their spouse, assuming they have good relationships with those people. And so those are the people that need these skills. And so instead of kind of saying something like, oh, show empathy, let them know you care, be there for them. It's like, great, that's all true. But what is coming out of my mouth to convey that I actually care and have empathy and am there for them? And so these active listening skills are the same skills that I teach to law enforcement. They are the same skills that I teach to 911 dispatchers. And they are very tactical and intentional ways to communicate with someone in crisis to de-escalate that situation. It's going to be a lot. Interrupt me at any point if you have questions, but we're going to move through these one by one.
Yeah, let's go.
The first one is a reflection. So a reflection is when you take what the person said and you say it back to them while labeling the emotions that are underneath it. So if you share with me that, maybe we work in healthcare together and we had a really difficult case last month, someone passed away, pick any sort of traumatic case that you want to think about. And you share with me, I'm having so many nightmares and I can't sleep and I can't get it out of my head. A reflection could be, hey, it sounds like you're having a really difficult time since that call last month. You're exhausted, you're frustrated, and you're not able to get a good night's sleep because of nightmares. What I did there was I said back to you the nightmares, the call last month, all those different things. But then I also thought to myself, okay, if Nick hasn't slept in a month and he can't get this really difficult thing out of his head, what might he be feeling? Well, he's probably tired, right? I don't know about you, but I don't sleep very well when I'm having nightmares. So probably exhausted. And you're probably kind of frustrated too, because you are a healthcare professional. You're used to dealing with hard things, but you just can't get this one out of your head. And so those are the moments where you're saying, hey, I see what you told me and I see how that feels. A lot of people will try to start these with things like, I understand what you're going through. It's an attempt at empathy, but how it comes across as a minimization of like, oh, I get it. I went through a similar thing. And it's like, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter about you. It just matters how you can make this person feel. We can edit that part out. Apologies. The second one that we want to talk about is a minimal encourager. So a minimal encourager is the sounds you make when someone's talking to let them know that you're still listening and you're still engaged without interrupting them. So these are your yes, wow, oh, okay. It's literally sounds or maybe a word or two. And this is phenomenal when someone is really just on a roll. Like they are venting and ranting and they need to get this out of themselves and you still want to stay engaged with them. This is not what you do when your mother calls and you put her on speakerphone and pull up Instagram and start just scrolling and trying to get her to stop talking about small town life. It is not that. You are truly actively engaged with this person who's sharing things with you. You can also use body language minimal encouragers. So this is when you're making eye contact, you're leaning in, you're nodding. All of those things let this person know, They're here with me, they're listening, they're engaged, and that is really, really important as well. The third active listening skill is what's called a mirror. So a mirror is when you say the last couple of words that someone said back to them and slap a question mark on the end of it. So maybe you're talking to a colleague and they are having a hard time at home and they say something to the effect of, oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible parent. My kids deserve better than me. And you might say, oh, better than you? Oh yeah, well, I'm drunk every night and I missed all their soccer games and blah 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 blah. And it just kind of carries on from there. What you're doing with this is you're saying, oh, tell me more about that, without having to ask that person a direct question. Direct questions aren't bad, but for someone in crisis who's already emotionally escalated, too many questions, one after the other, can start to feel like an interrogation. It also takes a fair amount of your brain power to figure out, okay, what question am I going to ask them next? Whereas with a mirror, you can just kind of keep pulling on the thread that they're giving you. It feels weird. Out of all the 6, this feels the weirdest when you first start using it. But once you do, it just becomes part of your normal speech pattern. And I've had probably hour-long crisis conversations with people where this is the only thing I'm doing. And they're just talking and talking and talking and telling me more about what's going on. So it's very, very powerful. You do want to be a bit intentional with what you mirror. So if someone says, oh, I'm such a terrible parent and my kids deserve better than me. And oh, I got to remember to put the laundry in the dryer. And you're like,
Feels
oh,
like
the laundry in the dryer?
Feels like an onion, right? Because at the end of it, it makes it a little bit deeper into the layer. Bad parent? Oh, yeah, well, it's because I'm this. And at the end of it, okay, but so they don't see much of you. And they go, yeah, and they keep layering the onion until you get right to the core of what's really causing the problem, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a gentle tug, right? We're not taking a butcher knife to the onion and saying, tell me what's at the core of this.
Yeah.
But we're just saying, oh, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. You're exactly right. And sometimes you'll do this beautiful mirror. Oh, better than you. And they will say, yeah. And then just kind of stop. And you're like, well, shoot, I didn't get another onion layer off on this one. And that is where you would then transition to a question, which is our fourth active listening skill. I'm a big fan of open-ended questions as opposed to closed-ended questions. And open-ended questions are just ones that people can answer with more than one word. So did you have a good weekend would be a closed-ended question because you either say yes or no. Like there's not much conversation that's going to be happening after that. But if I asked you, what did you do this weekend? How was your weekend? You're going to, at least if you follow standard conversational practices, you're going to tell me more than just, 1 or 2 words about what happened over the weekend. Why questions? So why did you do this? Why are we here today type of questions? Those are technically open-ended questions, but they can feel like an interrogation or like an invitation for you to defend yourself. Now, instead of thinking reflectively of, oh, why am I feeling this way? Why am I here today? You're now defending yourself and you're having to justify why you did what you did or are feeling what you're feeling. And in a moment of crisis, we don't need self-reflection. We need time and we need space and we need safety. So I really like how and what type questions. You can ask a why question as a how or a what question. So worst case scenario, you find your colleague on the roof and they're considering jumping. Instead of, why do you want to jump today? You could ask something to the effect of, what brought you up here? How did we get here today? What was going through your head when blah, 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 blah. So open-ended questions are amazing. What's important about them as well is it lets the person in crisis direct the conversation where they need it to go. So if I go into crisis interactions in my job, right, I go out in the field and I say, okay, I heard that this is a teenager experiencing suicidal ideation. I'm going to ask these standard 5 to 10 questions, and that is going to be the discussion. I might not even think to ask about a really important part of this young woman's story. Wouldn't have even crossed my mind. But if I ask open-ended questions and let her guide the conversation where she feels is most important, she's going to ultimately lead me to those really crucial parts of her story that maybe we couldn't have resolved the crisis without understanding. So open-ended questions are amazing. Our fifth skill is a summary statement. Summary statements are amazing at the end of a conversation or when someone starts throwing a lot of different things at you and you kind of start to lose count or lose track of all the different parts of their story that they've shared with you. So a summary statement looks something like, I've heard you say XYZ different things. Is that correct? So I've heard you say that you're really frustrated. You didn't get that promotion. You're having fights with your spouse at home and you're struggling with being an empty nester because your last kid just went away to college. Is that correct? And what that does is it lets this person know, I've been listening. I remember all these key parts of your story. And it also gives them an opportunity to correct you. That is crucial, and people always overlook that. It's not just about, hey, this is what I've heard you say. It's that permission-based opportunity for them to say, yep, you got it, you nailed it, which is a really good sign of rapport if you start getting some of those things back of like, yeah, oh no, that's it, you're totally right. Or it allows them to say, no, it's not that I'm struggling with being an empty nester. It's that I'm worried for my kid's safety because she's going to college in a town that isn't super great. Okay, got it. I'm going to now correct my mental image of what is going on in your life right now. We're going to recalibrate, and then we can continue the conversation there. It doesn't have to be exactly like verbatim, is this correct? Find a phrase that feels natural to you. For me, I often use something to the effect of, is that kind of a fair summary of where we're at right now? And people usually are on board with that. I
Yeah.
will say summary statements are unique for two reasons. One, this is the one time I will recommend that you interrupt someone in crisis, because if you are really just losing the story, something to the effect of, hey, Nick, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm so sorry, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. I've heard you say blah, 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 and then into your summary statement. Usually if you frame it like that, people are not going to get super up in arms about, oh my gosh, you interrupted me. How rude of you. You will occasionally have the Karen that's like, I was still talking. And you're like, I apologize, ma'am, please carry on, and just like step back. It's fine. But in general, people are okay with being interrupted when you frame it in the way of like, I really want to understand what you're telling me. The other reason summary statements are unique is because you're using the word I, and in general, I would not recommend doing that in crisis. So this is where I would recommend saying, I don't mean to interrupt. I want to understand you. I've heard you say these things. In other points in crisis, don't. It's not about you. You can just start the sentence with you. You're feeling frustrated. You're feeling this. It is all about that person in crisis.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
want to call out that if any of your listeners listen to any kind of relationship psychology type podcast or like couples counseling, the advice is the opposite. The advice is use I statements. So I'm feeling this way. I'm struggling with this. I'm having this difficulty, to avoid placing blame on, well, you did this and you make me feel mad and blah, 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 blah. Very, very true in couples counseling. Very, very not true in crisis counseling. So just recognize when to use those different skill sets there. In
Yeah. It's
terms of our
really,
last, oh
really
yeah, go ahead.
powerful. No, I
No,
just think
go
it's
for it.
really, really powerful. I've got some, I'll comment after because we've got the 6 points to get to, and I'll make sure that goes
Yes.
through clear. But some of this is ringing true for how we had to deal with my daughter as well, by the way. You know,
Ah,
it's not about how we felt when we were kids or how it was, she's not interested. We got to make
yep.
sure when we were going through that process, it was a steep learning curve. But let's go to number 6.
Number 6, yes. Well, first of all, just to comment on that, I think we all know as people, when our crotchety old grandparent is like, well, in my day, I walked to
Yeah.
school in the snow, both hills or both ways uphill. You're like, thanks, Gramps. That's not relevant to what I'm doing right now. And the same thing is true in crisis if you try to make it too much about yourself. So I love that corollary there. Our last active listening skill is actually silence, which is really, really difficult for people. When I'm teaching these skills, a lot of folks will be like, oh, cool, I can just sit there and say nothing. It's easy. But we as humans are so uncomfortable with silence. I had a class recently of law enforcement officers, and when I'm teaching this, I do some scenarios. So I'm like actively role playing someone in crisis, and I'm crying, and it's this whole thing. And she started scooting her chair away from me, like physically moving backwards away from me during this scenario, because she was so uncomfortable with just sitting in that moment of silence with me. No judgment on her, but just to highlight that this is really difficult for people. We want to jump in with some sort of reassurance. We want to change the topic and ask a question. We want to offer a solution or a recommendation or a resource. But what's happening in those moments of silence is the person in crisis is debating internally, probably subconsciously, if they can trust you with the next deepest, darkest part of their story. And so if you jump in with a redirect to something else, what you're telling them is, hi, I'm a little uncomfortable with the level of depth that we're at right now. And so we're going to talk about this thing instead. And it kind of gives this person an out of, okay, I don't actually have to talk about that. I don't have to reveal that part of my story. I'm not saying that you need to know every fiber of someone's being to help them in crisis, but those things of, can I say this out loud? Can I not say this out loud? Those are often the core of what's going on in this person's crisis. So by you sitting there and being silent and giving them that space, what you're telling them is, I'm okay, you're okay, I am strong enough and confident enough to hold anything that you want to put in front of me right now. And that is absolutely crucial. So I recommend about 10 seconds of silence before you do say something. And that's a legitimate 10 seconds, not like a count to 10 as fast as you can type of scenario, like a legitimate 10 seconds, or 3 minimal encouragers. So that could sound something like, you say something really, really difficult about, oh my gosh, well, my spouse and I are getting divorced. And I say, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So earlier you mentioned that, and then bring it around to something. Because what I'm doing in that moment with each of those minimal encouragers is, do you want to say something? Do you want to say something? Do you want to say something? Nope. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to redirect back to something else. But yeah, silence is a really difficult one, but such a powerful one. And the one that I always like to round out my 6 active listening skills with.
It's really powerful stuff. It's amazing actually how much synergy this has with other kind of listening skills. So obviously, I teach a sales team in recruitment. Silence is powerful. The summarizing, the open questions, not closed questions. It almost mirrors how I would train my sales team, and it's all really powerful. And yet, they're the hardest things sometimes to do. We're encouraged sometimes to give the solution before we work out what the problem is. I want to know. You also talked about speaking out loud, and as a coach, I do know that sometimes we think, well, the voice in our heads, it will sound completely different when we say it out loud. So we think, we don't need to say it out loud because we've already had the conversation ahead. Of course, when you have that conversation, it often sounds very different. So I think it's really, really powerful. HR leaders, I know you're driving culture, transformation, engagement, and now digital reinvention as well. But none of that works without the right people in the right seats. I'm Nick Day, host of this podcast, but also founder of JGA Recruitment Group. And here's what I hear every week from top HR leaders. They say, Nick, we can't find the talent. It's our biggest challenge. And when we do, we can't retain them. Well, that's where we come in. At JGA, we specialize in HR recruitment and only HR recruitment. From executive search assignments placing CHROs, to contingency hires finding HR pros, to global HR transformational contract placements, and every people role in between. Across every vertical and at every single level, we know where the top people are, what motivates them, and most importantly, how to get them excited about your opportunity, even if they're not actively looking. With engagement rates over 90%, we don't rely on job boards. We rely on relationships. We place fast, we place right, and we do it in a way that reflects your brand, your values, and your goals. So if you're building a strategic HR function, please don't leave it to chance. Visit jjrecruitment.com or reach out to me directly, and let's build the future of work together. A couple of things I wanted to bring up, because I think this is something that I had to learn through the hard way with my daughter. I don't mean to reference this so often, but it's my only sort of example, really. But when I got this particular response, I knew I was in a difficult situation. And when it was, the words she would say to me is, you don't understand. And often that would come back because I've said, well, I know this and this must be, and I've maybe made an assumption, or I've tried to be supportive. And as soon as she gave me those lines, it was really difficult to pull her back. And I suspect in the kind of suicidal ideation situation, that could be something, if we go off track or we do get it wrong and we get that kind of response. I wonder if there's any tips or any advice you could give to help bring them back online if we feel like we're losing someone in that conversation. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to mention, only because all the movies seem to go down this way, is you've got so much to live for. It's like that standard line, because we're seeing it from a different perspective. And immediately it says we're not listening. So I guess there are two potential traps that I think could be easy for our listeners to fall into. And I wondered if there's anything we really shouldn't say, or there anything, and if we do say the wrong thing, is there a quick way to bring it back?
Absolutely. I will say that in negotiations or in crisis communications, I say the wrong thing all the time. We all make mistakes. I've literally called someone by the wrong name in a negotiation.
Wow.
And they're like, who the F is blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh no, we had to walk that one back. Like, it happens all the time. You're human. Let yourself off the hook a little bit. The biggest thing that I can recommend, if you do say something wrong, you call them by the wrong name, or you get that response of like, no, you don't understand. First of all, you within yourself, take a breath. Remind yourself it is not about you. It doesn't matter what you think you know, because you're probably wrong. It is about this person in front of you. And then redirect the conversation. Hey, Nick, I'm so sorry. I really do want to understand you. Can you tell me what I've got wrong here? And give them back that permission to correct you, especially in, I'd say, medium crisis situations. So not like I'm on a rooftop about to jump crisis, but I just got fired and I'm having a really bad day type of crisis. People don't want to correct you. Like, there's still that level of politeness there where they're like, no, I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I might say you don't understand, but I'm not going to name the 20 things that you got incorrect. And so you need to give them that permission and say, hey, I want to understand. I don't understand right now. Clearly, like I missed something here. Will you tell me what I got wrong? Because it's really important to me that I understand, what your world is like. Because you're right, I don't know. I haven't been there. I don't know what this is like. And just give them back that permission. If you get a response then that's like, well, you don't care, like you're just listening because you have to, or like you're not going to change. One of my favorite lines that can be adapted to someone that you work with or a friend or a family member, because I get a lot of people that are like, well, you don't actually care. You're just paid to be here. And I'll tell them, I'm like, look, dude, there's a million easier ways to make money. I am genuinely honored to be here and sit here with you in this part of your story. And I've never had that not work. That's worked every time I've used that line to kind of bring us back on track. And so if you're talking with someone you love, you can kind of use the same thing. Like, hey, look, there's a ton of other things that I could be doing right now. I'm 2 hours over the end of my shift, but I care about you so much that I want to be here and I want to listen. You are so important to me. Your story matters to me and I want to get it right. Will you please just tell me where I got it wrong so we can get back on track? Reaffirm that you genuinely within yourself want to be there for them. And throw in some compliments too. Like, you are the best coworker. Like, you always bring snacks, and you know me, food is the direct way to my heart. Like, I love working with you. I care about you. I want to be here. And just layer it on, like, even if it feels like a little bit too much, really reaffirm that for them. In terms of things just to avoid saying in general, I wish all the listeners could have seen my face when you said the thing of like, oh, well, you have so much to live for, because that's just like one of those, oh, please, for the love of God, never say
You would
that
be.
type of sentences.
I would like to think it's something I wouldn't say, but you see it so often. I was like, it came to mind. You see it in every movie, and you're like, oh, you inherently feel like it's the wrong thing to say, but
yes. Yeah, it's one of those things that is well-intentioned. Like, you're trying to get this person to see that they have stuff to live for and they should come down off the ledge and all those different things. But what it sounds like is complete and utter ignorance, as well as a dismissal of the depth of their pain. So whatever it is that they're telling you, no matter how difficult it sounds to you, it is the worst thing that's ever happened to them if they're in this moment of crisis. Like, it is really something deeply devastating to them. And for you to say, it's not that bad, like, you've got all these other things, completely invalidates what they were just talking about. Same kind of thing. I never use the words at least. So, oh my gosh, I just got fired. Like, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent next month. Hey man, at least it's not like a cancer diagnosis. You've still got your health.
Yeah, right.
What are we doing? Yeah. Right? We just completely ran over what this person was struggling with. So anything that is kind of talking about a silver lining, anything that is talking about you have a lot to live for, or at least it's not this, are generally things that I would avoid saying. On the other end of that spectrum, I would avoid the kind of toughen up mentality of like, look, be a man. I'm calling out men here because this is usually who this narrative is given to. But be a man. You're stronger than this. Like, don't cry. You just need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps and move on. For someone who's in crisis, especially a guy that's been in bro culture his whole life, there is already this feeling of being a sense of failure. And so for you to then come in and kind of like hammer on that and just poke that button, that's not going to be productive for that person in that conversation. I don't want to get kind of too far down the rabbit hole of like, well, don't say this particular word and don't say the word sunshine because that's an immediate trigger for like, there's nothing like that. Everyone's going to be different. But whatever you're saying that's kind of jumping over this person's pain, that's probably going to be problematic. And I would avoid saying that.
Yeah, because too much information can be paralyzing as well, right? We suddenly get panicked, we can't say anything at all. But I understand the idea that almost like comparison is the thief of joy, in opposition, really. You don't want to be saying, but you've still got this. It's like, you're not listening. It makes total sense to me. It probably makes a really good opportunity then to talk a little bit about your life model. Now, this may be something that our listeners have heard for the very first time, and it's a really powerful framework. And I think anyone, whether you're an HR manager, L&D leader listening to this, you can share this with your peers. I don't think it really matters. You don't have to be an HR practitioner listening to this show for this to be relevant for, because it can help someone through a crisis. So I wondered if you can just share that with us, because companies can use it, people can use it. It can help reduce liability. There's loads of things behind this. I wonder if you could share it with our listeners.
Absolutely. So the LIFE model is an acronym. It's L-I-F-E for each of the 4 steps in the model. I spent entirely too much time trying to come up with that acronym, like something that was related to suicide prevention, and then it had all the 4 steps in there. But that's what I came up with. And so the LIFE model, the first step is listen. And that is using all of the skills that we just talked about. It is about being there for that person, building rapport with that person, sitting with that person's pain, and not immediately jumping to a solution. You had mentioned this earlier, Nick, of like people want to offer a solution, a resource, they want to solve the problem. But in crisis, that's not your job. Your job is
Yeah.
just to be a witness to that person's pain and let them know that they're not alone in it. So L is listen, I is inquire. This is where we actually ask about suicidal ideation directly. I'm just going to give a really high level overview and then we can kind of break down each of these
Sure.
pieces. But I is the asking piece. This is where we transition from all the warm fuzzies, all the relationship building into now we're going to actually talk about the suicidal ideation and what we're going to do with that to help make sure that you stay alive. The F is forming a safety plan. So way back when we had safety contracts, and essentially what that was you and I would sign a piece of paper. You're my therapist. I'm the person in crisis. And we would both sign a contract that says that I'm not going to kill myself. And we thought that it would work. And we unfortunately had to learn the hard way that it doesn't, because all that does is create kind of this obligatory reason to live, right? I don't actually have any resources within myself or motivation within myself. I'm just doing it because we signed a piece of paper. And so now we've learned better and we know that safety plans are more effective. I can dive into that in a second, but that's the next step. And then E is eliminating lethal means. So essentially what the goal of this is to put time and distance between the person and the method that they want to use to take their life. In the I, we're going to do a really quick risk assessment of, how acute is this crisis? Do I need to like jump on this person and call 911 right away? Or is this something we can safety plan and talk through? And so in that process, one of the things you're going to ask about is, well, have you thought about how? Have you thought about a means that you would use to take your life? And then that's going to inform the E of this model of eliminating lethal means. So these last two steps, lethal means restriction and then the safety plan, those are two tools that anyone can use. You do not need a psychology degree. You don't need to be a doctor or a first responder. These are conversations that you can have with anyone in crisis, and they are the two most effective ways to keep this person alive through this suicidal crisis and through the next one.
Obviously, a lot of this is going to involve potentially a huge amount of trust, particularly if it's with a co-colleague, someone who has shared things that are, could be related to very personal things. If you feel like you've received what you perceive to be suicidal ideation, maybe you've been more direct and actually asked them, you've got to that point. And obviously I wouldn't be trained to know how to handle that specifically, but equally, I don't want to betray that individual's trust. What would be the steps you'd recommend that I took in that situation? I want to show that I've listened, I care, of course, but I'm also someone they can confide in. But equally, I want to make sure they've got the care that they need, potentially need, because they haven't done that act yet, but you're worried they might. What's the best way to manage that situation, particularly for maybe the HR people listening to this that may have those conversations in a confidential environment, but there is a potential risk to their well-being?
Yeah, a number of different things are coming up here. To your point of trust being the core of this, you are absolutely accurate. You're not going to get to the F and the E, or really even the I in the life model, unless you have enough trust with that person. They're just going to blow you off. Oh yeah, I'm fine. No big deal. No big deal. It's all of that L that builds that trust. For the person who's saying, oh my gosh, like I'm not equipped to handle this. Someone just told me they want to die and I don't know what to do in this situation. That is why we have the life model, is to give you some of those skills that you can use. That being said, I never want to push someone outside of their own comfort zone of what they feel good about engaging in. I'm not trying to
Sure.
turn people into therapists or crisis counselors or
Right.
negotiators. And so if you, as the, provider in this situation, the provider of crisis care, if you feel like you've reached the end of your limit of what you can do, you can absolutely have a conversation with that person. And the biggest thing that I want to recommend here is what's called a warm handoff. So we could be sitting down together. You could be telling me some really hard things and I could, validate the heck out of you. Nick, that sounds terrible. Like it sounds like you're going through blah, 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 blah. I want to be here for you and I want to listen to you, and you can always come and talk to me. And I also want to rope in some other folks that might be able to help you, because I'm just the HR person, right? I care about you. I want to be here for you. And I want to make sure that you have the best available support. Can I share an idea with you? Can we call the crisis line together, and I'll sit here with you. We'll put it on speakerphone. We'll have a conversation with them. And if you want, I can kind of tell them what you've told me so you don't have to repeat it. Would that be okay? And if you say, no, you can't tell anyone. You can't tell anyone. Okay. Back to active listening. Any sort of resistance that you get to a solution. Okay. Thanks for telling me. We're going to go back. We're going to build more trust. But if you say yes, that's an opportunity to literally put the phone on speaker and call the crisis line together. And what you're doing with that is, instead of saying, here's a pamphlet, go forth and conquer, you're saying, we're going to do this transition together. You know me, you trust me, we've been in this trench for a little while together. We're going to do this very warm handoff. I also highlighted in that little kind of mock transition that I just did, the concept of, hey, I can tell them what you've told me so you don't have to rehash it. The reason that I brought that up is, especially in the emergency services system, people have to tell their story 17 million times in one day. So for example, they call 911 and they tell 911 what's going on. And then law enforcement and I show up, and then they tell law enforcement, because I don't have lights and sirens, so I got to get there later. So they tell law enforcement, and then I show up, and then they tell me again. And then we call an ambulance to take him to the hospital, and then they tell the ambulance crew, and then they get to the hospital, and then they tell the hospital crew. And at this point, they're just frustrated. Like, we've lost all of the emotional tone of that story. And it's just, I woke up this morning and my wife left me and now I want to die. Like, that's all you're going to get out of that person at that point. And so for me to say, hey, I will take on the emotional burden of telling this story again so you don't have to, that helps you feel seen. It takes some of the cognitive load off of you. And it also, it provides an opportunity for you to correct me, right? It's its own version of a summary. No, it's not this. And I've had that happen before, where I'm doing a warm handoff to a nurse at the hospital and I get like 3 sentences in and the person is like, no, that didn't happen. This happened. And then just finish telling their whole story. And I'm like, warm handoff complete. So that's kind of that opportunity there. And then the last thing I'll say, if the warm handoff doesn't work and the person is like, no, you cannot ever in a million years, ever tell anyone. There are exceptions to confidentiality rules when it comes to imminent danger. And so if you are legitimately concerned that this person is going to walk out of your office and not be alive by the time work starts tomorrow morning, you not only have the right, but you have the obligation to escalate that to whatever that next higher level of care is, whether likely calling 911 or calling the crisis line. And a way that you can have that conversation with this person is, I care about you so much. And just go back to that care piece, right? I care about you so much. I know this is going to be really hard for you to hear, but I have an obligation to tell someone else about this because I'm worried that you're not going to be able to keep yourself safe. This is not to betray your trust. This is not because I'm mad at you or think you're weak or incapable. This is because I care that much about you and you are that important of a person in my life. Expect them to be frustrated. Expect them to walk out of your office. Doesn't mean you did the wrong thing. Your obligation is to their life, not to their feeling in this immediate moment. Also, after the crisis passes, expect them to come back. I've had a lot of people, when I tell them like, hey, sorry, like we have to take you to the hospital, and they get all mad about it and blah, blah, blah. I've had them call me later and be like, hey, I just want to apologize because I don't know what I said in that moment, but I'm sure I wasn't very nice to you. And you actually really helped me. So thank you for doing that.
Wow.
So recognize that it might not feel good. It might feel like you're betraying them, but you are saving their life by doing that.
It's amazing. It's amazing. So if I'm an HR leader listening to this, this is fantastic. And I'm hoping, people listening to this could potentially save someone's life. So it's really, really important work. But how can we turn this individual type conversation we might have, or we hear it from a colleague, a friend, whoever it might be in terms of suicidal ideation, and move it into becoming the HR leaders listen to this to help them to create, I guess, what I would call crisis-ready organizations? Like, what would that look like? How do we take that from a one-to-one point level and build it into a culture, really, where the cultural signs are there that an organization can look out for its employees, has the right infrastructure, positions, whatever it might be. I don't know how to term it, but you know where I'm going. So we have that crisis-ready organization and program in place.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that, because this is the type of the interview and type of education where someone can take this back and be like, I'm going to be the person and I'm going to do the suicide prevention. And that's amazing. I love that. Please do that. And recognize that carrying the mental health of an entire organization on your shoulders and your shoulders alone is not sustainable for you. Like, you cannot be responsible for everyone's psychological health on your team. And so this is where you have to figure out, how do we get this in the hands of other people? And so there's a couple different ways to do that. One, identify who your key social linchpins in the organization are. So is it your middle managers? Is it your C-suite? Is it your frontline workers? Who are the people that people go to when they're struggling? Those people naturally exist. They might not have supervisory titles. They might not formally be peer support if you don't have a peer support team, but identify who those people are and then get this training in their hands. That could look like sharing this podcast episode with them. That could look like connecting with me and bringing me in to do some training and work with them in person and really just instill this, because it's one thing to listen to it, right? But it's another to actually practice it and learn it and get those repetitions with it. But figure out who those people are. And then also consider going upstream from you. So talk to your executive team, show them this episode, right? Blame it on me. With this crazy person from Washington State said that we need to do this. And I don't know, I think she's kind of onto something. Use this conversation as an in to a conversation with them about how do we change this culture. If you get the pushback of, oh, well, we have an EAP, or, oh, we have no one that's struggling with mental health in our organization. Send me a DM. I will send you statistics and we can have that conversation about what it actually looks like to have struggling mental health in a workplace. Bit of a side tangent, but I had a prospective client that I was talking with one time, just reached out and said, hey, this is what I offer, training and education and consulting and all the type of stuff. And he responded, he was like, oh, sounds cool, but we don't have any mental health challenges in our company. And I was like,
Wow.
okay. He had a team of like 500 people. I'm like, bro, they're there. Whether you know it or not, there are people that are struggling. So don't be that person. Take this conversation, bring it to your C-suite. Don't kind of let them be like, oh, whatever, we have nothing. No, this is serious. 4% of Americans every year consider suicide. We have a team of 100, which means 4 people out there, pick one of them. They could be considering not being alive tomorrow. Like, we need to have this conversation. And so, yeah, go upstream, go downstream, identify who are the people that people naturally go to. And whether you create a formal peer support team or not, connect with me, connect with someone like myself, bring us in, have that training on the ground, specifically tailored to your organization, so that this doesn't just become a nice podcast episode to listen to, but the basis from which you build a culture that people actually know how to help each other in.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I mean, back in 2023, I had a guy called Paul McGregor on the show who wrote the book Man Up, Man Down. And his very much was trying to help suicide prevention, particularly in men. I think he said at the time, for men aged under the age of 45, it was the biggest killer of men under the age of 45 in the UK was suicide. And that shocked me when I heard that statistic in the moment. I had no idea. And the idea that there's no mental health when you've got 500 plus employees, right? It means we don't really understand the extent of the mental health crisis beyond not just suicide, but all the different, layers in between. And I think that there are stories out there and there's many of them, and it's trying to help someone as one person at a time, really. But if you are, I guess, what's the message I can give to HR what's the message they really need to hear right now on the back of all of this? If we could deliver one message to HR and L&D professionals to help them protect their people, improve their culture, create that crisis-ready team, and we can, maybe it's too complex to put into one thing, but what would that message be from you?
It would be to pay attention and to listen. And I think maybe the message that goes in between that is have the courage to listen. We as people, we can recognize that, there's something off with Bob lately. Like, he's showing up late all the time and there's all these things that are going on there, but we need to have the skill to listen and the courage to listen. Of my life model, if you guys forget every part of it, but one, remember the listen, because that is going to be 80% of the work. The asking about suicidal ideation, the safety plan, the lethal means restriction, all of that is important. And all of those things need to be done. But if all you can do is sit there with that person and let them know that they're not alone, that is the most powerful thing that you can do. That sounds a little fluffy. And I just want to clarify this by, it's not just, let them know they're not alone and be there with them. But research shows that people that feel socially rejected and isolated and like they have no one in their circle, that is a really, really big risk factor for suicide. So it's not just that it feels good for that person to have someone sitting with them. It literally can save their life if they go from feeling, I am alone in the world, no one cares about me, to, wow, my HR director actually listened and actually kind of understood what I'm going through. That in and of itself could save someone's life. So that was a very long, short nugget, but that would be the nugget is listen, have the courage to listen, and recognize when someone might need that extra care.
Yeah, I don't think it sounds fluffy at all. I think actually the risk is being too vague and not actually asking the questions. In HR, we love a survey in HR, we love asking questions, but sometimes I think HR teams often do shy away from the more challenging questions, from the ones that actually move the needle. And if we're not willing to ask and show that we've got that level of support, if we hide in vagueness, we sometimes won't really get to grips with what's happening in our organizations. And I think we need to be a little bit braver. And we can cultivate courage in the way that we do that. And having those more challenging questions, maybe more one-to-ones, maybe getting under the hood. If you're looking at all the metrics, everything now is about AI and metrics in HR. How is AI going to give us more trends, more analysis? We'll be able to identify when certain teams' absences are going up. Maybe there's a poor leader that's causing mental health crisis within your organizations. Maybe there's some trends we can identify that may just cause you to prompt that wellness meeting. And maybe it's nothing. We've got pay on demand now, which is something that's really starting to impact the workspace, that sometimes people are accessing pay on demand more frequently than usual. That could be a sign there's something else going on. I'm not saying it is, and we don't suddenly have to be full questioning everything straight away, but it's an opportunity to start identifying if there's things going on in an organization that we may be able to improve. And I think that's really, really important that people take away from this show, that, as you say, ask questions, you follow that life model, try and build that trust. And then you might find that actually in working in HR, you could genuinely save a life. You build that trust and they share with you something that can really make a difference. So I think it's very, very, very powerful stuff. Is there anything else I haven't asked? It's such a critical subject. I don't want to leave this episode and open the vault before not asking you a question that could generally make that level of difference. Is there anything I haven't asked today that you'd like to share?
Oh man, I could nerd out about this for hours and hours and hours. So I guess I'll just leave with two things, especially because we're talking about asking the hard questions and having the hard conversations. Number one, when you are asking someone if they're considering suicidal ideation, the best way to do it is very calmly and very directly. So it is, or considering suicide, not suicidal ideation, but very calmly, very directly. It is not dancing around the topic. We don't need to be afraid of using the word. Just straight up ask, are you considering taking your life today? Has suicide crossed your mind? Use the word calm, direct, confident. If you dance around it, if you say things like, are you thinking about hurting yourself? What that tells that person is, I'm uncomfortable. Please don't say yes, because I don't know what to do if you say yes. And so just saying the word, same thing with silence, right? I'm asking the question. I am okay with whatever the answer is. I can hold that space for you. So very direct, very calm, very confident for the question. You're not going to put the idea in their head or anything like that. And then my second thing that I'll wrap up with is, don't corporatize suicide prevention too much. So yes, look at metrics, look at employee mental health survey results, like do all of those things. But these types of conversations that we're talking about, this is, you happen to be in the break room with them. You're pulling your sandwich out of the fridge and they're getting their stuff out of the microwave. Hey, Bob, just wanted to check in. I noticed this the other day. How are things going for you? This is not a, Mr. Smith, please come to my office so we can have a 15-minute wellness check-in.
Right.
Like, don't turn this into a thing. This is a human-to-human interaction. And so, yes, structure is good. Programs are good. We love it. Yes, do it. And do not lose the humanity in these conversations, because without it, you're not ever going to get anywhere when it comes to real trust and real rapport with that person.
Yeah, it's really good advice. Let's open the HRLND vault. So 4 short questions. I have tried to make these more relevant to this particular topic than my usual questions. So a little bit more left field to those that have heard the show before. But what's one thing HR leaders should stop doing immediately when responding to a mental health or suicide concern?
Oh, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is what we talked about earlier of kind of the placating. You have so much to live for. Like, let's immediately take you to the EAP, call the EAP. You are that first point of contact, be that true, authentic first point of contact, and sit in that pain with that person for as long as it takes.
Fantastic. Number 2, what is one simple practical action any organization can take this week to become more crisis ready?
Ask someone how they're doing, and not in the, oh, hey, how you doing? Oh yeah, I'm good. How about you? Cool. We never actually got anything under the hood. But when you're sitting down with someone at lunch, hey, I saw on Facebook that you and your wife took a trip to Hawaii. Tell me about that. What was that like? Doesn't even have to be about mental health. Just have a conversation with a human, and get a little bit deeper than just the, oh, hey, I'm good, how about you type of conversation.
Yeah, fantastic. What is one myth about suicide prevention you wish HR would abandon forever?
Which one do I want to pick? I would say that suicide isn't in the workplace, and rather that suicide prevention isn't in the workplace. There's often this determination of like, this is work, we do work things and we talk about work things, and then you go home and you have personal things. And it's not true. Like you mentioned earlier, you spend a third of your life at work. You spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your family. And so this isn't the fluffy, like, oh, work is a family type of thing. It's kind of true, because they're the people that you see the most, whether that's a healthy relationship or not. And so don't stick your head too far in the sand of, oh, suicide prevention doesn't happen here. It doesn't matter. This is just about work. It's about people. And never forget that everything is about people, and it's about those relationships and those conversations.
Fantastic. And last but by no means least, what's the most underrated but life-saving related skill that any leader listening to this show could develop?
Listening, 100% listening. Yeah. If you know how to listen and not solve and not make it about you, but just listen, that's the best thing that you can ever do for someone, in crisis or not in crisis.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, Jessi, it's been a fantastic conversation. Your energy is amazing, by the way. The power of your life model, I think, is going to have a huge impact on workplace culture over the next decade. I will put links in my show notes. If anyone wants to find out more, please do check that out. Introduce some of these things into your organizations. Be more crisis ready. You had an opportunity, having listened to all of Jessi's responses today, to really make a difference in people's lives. And as I said, assuming the statistic is still relatively accurate, it's the biggest killer for under 45-year-old men in the UK. I'm sure it's probably similar elsewhere as well. So this is going on in your organization, whether you believe it or not. So it's a chance for us to really take positive action. I think you brought unbelievable clarity, courage, compassion, knowledge, energy, which I've mentioned, to a topic that affects more workplaces than we realize. And we know it's sensitive, and sometimes it's difficult to talk about these sensitive subjects so openly. I think you've given a real opportunity for people to listen, to understand, to know that suicide prevention isn't just for those with clinical expertise. It's about awareness, conversation, human connection. As you say, go to the caller and say, hey, how you doing? How was your holiday? Whatever it might be, and just start those conversations. And I think for anyone who wants to learn more about Jessi's wonderful work, please do check out in the show notes the link. I will put a link there. It's jessibeyerinternational.com, but I'll put it in the show notes so you can go straight through to that to find out more. Go and find out more about the L.I.F.E model, the suicide prevention model that she's talked about today. And I can't thank you enough for bringing such a important subject area to life, actually, on the show with such energy and enthusiasm. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the conversation.
Jessi, it's been a pleasure. Deal is the all-in-one platform to hire, manage, and pay your global team, giving HR one place to work instead of juggling disconnected systems. From onboarding to offboarding, Deal brings payroll, compliance, and even IT access together across 150 plus countries, all on infrastructure they built themselves. That means HR isn't wrestling with logins, tabs, and tools all day long. Book your demo today at DEEL.com/NickDayHR. That's deal.com/NickDayHR.